more than anything, it was just about a sense of openness that I was trying to practice. It did mean that I was a little bit of a disaster on set, where I was weeping a lot. The scene towards the end of the film between Kelly Marie Tran and Lily Gladstone in the garden, there was a take where I just fully lost it, and I had to yell. I yelled cut with like a warbly voice, and Lily Gladstone, I could just hear her from the garden say, "Are you crying again?"
Hello, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America. In this episode, a marriage of convenience between two friends goes hilariously awry in director Andrew Ahn's romantic comedy, The Wedding Banquet. This remake of the 1993 film tells the story of Min, a gay man hoping to stay in the country and avoid being dragged into his family business. Proposing a green card marriage with his lesbian friend Angela, things soon get complicated when his grandmother surprises them with plans for an extravagant Korean wedding banquet. In addition to The Wedding Banquet, Ahn's other directorial credits include the feature films Fire Island, Driveways, and Spa Night, and episodes of the series Deli Boys, Bridgerton, Generation, Pride, MacGyver, Hentified, and This Close. Following a screening of the film at the DGA Theater in Los Angeles, Ahn spoke with director Daniel Kwan about filming The Wedding Banquet. Listen on for their spoiler-filled conversation.
Hello. How is everyone? Happy Saturday. Andrew, I love this movie.
Thank you.
I'm very excited to be talking to you about it just because like you, this movie was pretty formative for me, and the original Wedding Banquet. How many people have actually seen the original Wedding Banquet as well? Okay, so yeah, good. Yeah, it's a classic, and so I was so pleasantly blown away by how much this still moved me and still kind of surprised me, and anytime I thought I knew what was going to happen, you kind of subverted it and you made it so your movie and so specific to this moment. And so first I want to ask you, what's your relationship with the original film, the first time you watched it, and when was the moment when you realized, oh, I'm the filmmaker who can reimagine this, and like I know exactly how to do it, and like what was that spark for you?
Yeah. So I watched the original film when I was 8 years old. Because my mom saw the VHS at a video rental store, and she had heard about the movie. She was like, "Hey, this is that movie with Asian people that white people are watching. We should see what it's about." And so rented it, not knowing that it was a queer film. And so we watched it as a family. And as a nascent gay boy, it like really it had an impact on me, in ways that I couldn't even quite articulate at the time. And in retrospect, I realized that it was the first gay film that I'd ever seen. And so the fact that it was a gay and Asian film and a film that's made so beautifully is very meaningful to me. And so I was really anxious about tackling this film, not just because it's a classic, but also because it means so much to me. Our producers, Anita Guo, Caroline Clark, Joe Pirro, and James Seamus, they had a conversation before I even knew about this, this idea. And Joe Pirro and James Seamus had produced my second feature, Driveways, and they suggested that I speak with Anita about this film. And I rewatched the film, in preparation for this conversation with Anita. And I think, like any great art, it inspired me, like it resonated with me in so many new ways now, as an adult. Watching the Ang Lee film, it brought up these feelings and insights about, living as a queer man today, this question of, should I get married? This question of, should I have kids? And so these modern questions, kind of inspired by watching the Ang Lee film, really were the roots of, the tree of the film that you see today.
I think one of the lines that really hit me really hard, just, having an Asian mom, seeing Joan Chen on the phone saying, imagine my daughter marrying a man. What will people think? I was like, oh my God, this is brilliant. It's completely flipped the entire trope on its head. And it works because that's, in some ways, it's almost like it's a beautiful sign of progress. The fact that you can have a character like that say that and it makes sense is incredible. I actually want to talk about just your relationship with James, because he is a longtime collaborator with Ang Lee, and he helped write the original film. What was it like? Because I can't even imagine trying to rework this movie, but to reimagine it with one of the original writers sounds like just kind of intimidating. Like what were those conversations like? What were your common goals? Where were the moments of contention? How was that collaboration?
Yeah. I'd worked with James, where he was my producer on Driveways, but to work with him now as a co-writer on The Wedding Banquet, it's a different relationship, a very different relationship. And, James Schamus, there are very few people like him in the industry. He's been a studio head, he's been a producer, a writer, a director. The kind of vantage point that he has on the art form is pretty incredible. I'll say, Screenwriter James was so much fun to work with, and I learned.
Producer
so much.
James wasn't as fun. Is that what you're saying?
No. No, it is a thing where it's just a different, a different set of priorities, way of navigating kind of the creative relationship. But I think with this film, there were a few instincts that we had, in figuring out a structure or a plot for the reimagining. One was kind of silly, but made a lot of sense to both of us, which is, what if the bride, what if Wei Wei from the original film was also queer, and now you have two queer couples. And, I was thinking so much about kind of how so much has changed for the queer community since 1993. And one of those things is gay marriage, right? Now gay people can get married. And so I wanted one couple to kind of have that question of whether or not we should get married. And then the second couple, I thought about how in the original film, they accidentally have this baby. What if we show a couple planning to have a baby? And so that was the kind of foundation that really helped us, move forward. And, James was so important to the architecture and the engineering of the film. There's just so many characters, and there's so many themes to explore, so many arcs to develop that, there's just a lot of engineering, and James is really incredible at that. And also just a real immense respect for these characters. It was James's idea. Min's grandmother in earlier drafts was still in the dark about the whole scheme for most of the movie. And James was the one that was like, "Oh, she's too smart."
Yeah, that was one of the moments where I was like, "Oh, thank God, you guys really got ahead of the audience." I think, at least for me, where I was like, "Oh, this is the only way to remake this movie, or to try to recapture this movie, is to completely just leapfrog over the original concept." That scene was so funny. Yeah, it's brilliant.
I love it. It's really great. The lesbian snake line from Yoon Yo-jung is one of my favorite. And that's a very specific Korean colloquialism. And we actually didn't fully translate it. She says lesbian 꽃뱀, which actually directly translates to lesbian flower snake.
Ooh, okay.
But in test screenings, it confused people more than kind of getting the laugh.
Yeah, the Asian languages are a little too flowery sometimes. It is like very poetic sometimes, and people it doesn't always translate.
Yeah.
That makes me think of a lot of different things, but I'm going to save that for later. The delight of this film is just the cast you found, right? The family that you guys have put together. They're all so different, and they all have very different, I guess, strengths when they come on the screen. What are you looking for when you are trying to find the right collaborators to embody these characters? Like, what's kind of your priority as a director when you are imagining rehearsing and shooting and really just working with these people?
Yeah, it was kind of the biggest challenge of the film is to create this family, because the film is about family. And so we needed to nail it. And I remember telling our casting director, Jenny Ju, who's one of the best in the business. Jenny had done casting for director Bong Joon-ho on Okja and Snowpiercer. And, we had a very long series of conversations about putting together this family that by the end of the film, we wanted, our audience to want to be a part of them. And so there was, of course, the conversation about each character, and wanting to have, actors that really embody the core, the kind of emotional center of these characters, but then also trying to find actors who would really embrace the process that we were interested in, a sense of generosity, vulnerability with each other, so that we could really create an intimacy.
Give us let's talk shop for a second. What exactly is that process of generosity? What does that look like? If say people show up on set, you're about to rehearse a scene, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about actors really being open to each other's ideas, and to feel like, you come to set excited for discovery, as opposed to having rehearsed it in such a way that you go onto set knowing exactly what you want to do.
Can you think of any specific discoveries that you found that really made it in the film, and you're just so delighted every time you see it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Of course, when you have a very busy cast, right? Actors who are, stacking projects, you very rarely have rehearsal time. And Lily Gladstone and Kelly Marie Tran, we had a 15-minute rehearsal before their first scene, and that was really
indie filmmaking. I know this too well. 15 minutes is a luxury.
It is a luxury. And I remember, one of the things that I wanted to do was, it's very important to me to have Kelly and Lily create a secret that they would only know and never tell me. It's an exercise that's kind of born out of this previous experience I had, where someone told me that I had to know everything about my characters, and I kind of resisted that, because I was like, I don't even know everything about myself,
Amen. Yeah.
And I felt like if I did know everything about my characters, they would feel so two-dimensional. They would just be puppets. And so to give these characters a humanity, I felt like I should give my actors secrets that are just theirs.
I love that. Some of the best advice is the advice that you reject outright, because then you actually know what you are trying to do. Have they told you that secret? Or
no, and I never want to.
You're gonna die with You're gonna go to the grave.
But it's a thing where they created a secret together, and then they also created a secret from each other. That was something that I wanted them to do. And then the last thing was to find a kind of physicality of just how they might be a couple. And I remember they were hugging, and then Kelly kind of leaned into Lily's bosom, and then she was like, "Oh, I found my spot." and then they use that in the scene that we shot immediately after. It's at the bar after Kelly's character has confronted her mom, and they're hugging, and there's just this beautiful intimacy that we never would have discovered had, I had like a very strict idea of what I wanted the blocking to be, or if we hadn't had that rehearsal, and that spot was something that, Kelly talked about it, later in the film when, Leah's run off, Kelly was like, I want my spot back, and so that physicality became a tool for Kelly in playing Angela.
I love that. You really do have to kind of speed run a relationship when you're building chemistry. You try every kind of formation, every kind of conversation to kind of find, like, you're trying to give the impression of years of intimacy. And finding that things like that spot is like that. I feel like that is how you get the kind of chemistry you get on screen. Like those two are so lovely together. And it's also just like, I feel like any scene that Lily's in, she's so grounding. She can take anything, whether it's funny or sad. And I just really believe it. It's stunning. I want to figure out what kind of director you are. Because on set there's so many different ways to direct, and so often we don't get to watch each other, right? It's like you only know your own way, and it's really confusing. And so the few times I have been on other people's sets, it's always striking. Some directors are really like, they mostly lean on the actors, and that's really what it's all about. Other directors, like, they spend a lot of time with the cinematographer, and that's their main person. Who are you leaning on the most from your crew, your keys? Who are you spending the most of the time trying to figure out, your day and how to get through the day?
Yeah. It's so funny to talk to you about this because I realized the first time we met, I actually directed you in a scene study class with Joan Darling.
Oh my God.
I know.
That's wild.
I know. You played my main character in Spa Night in a workshop scene.
I forgot that's how we met. But yes, that's crazy. How many people have actually seen Spa Night? I know this was Andrew's first film. It's beautiful, incredible thing. But we kind of came up through Sundance around the same time. And actually both of our first films premiered at Sundance the same year.
The same year, 2016.
We were like two of the only Asian directors. And people would always get us confused.
I know.
I know. It was a fun week. But that's true that our first interaction was you directing me. That's wild.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was such a different setting, right? Where it was just, in a little black box theater, and it was an educational, kind of process. But like on set, I'll say with this film in particular, I wanted to create this feeling of family, amongst the cast and crew. I also, because the film is so much about just a kind of intense emotionality, like not being able to understand your emotions, like feeling them so intensely, trying to block them. Like I did feel like I had to wear my heart on my sleeve a little as a director, just be very heart forward through the process. And so, I think I tried to really be a good parent on set and kind of give everybody the support that they needed. And, in some scenes, that was more, some actors over another. And then in other scenes, it was, really working with the crew, my cinematographer, production designer, costume designer. And so it really was like, I tried to keep it very organic. But, I think, more than anything, it was just about a sense of, openness that I was trying to practice and really encourage. It did mean that I was a little bit of a disaster on set where I was weeping a lot. Like it was just kind of part of it.
You're one of those directors. I love it. That's great.
But like the scene towards the end of the film between Kelly Marie Tran and Lily Gladstone in the garden, that reuniting. There was a scene where I there was a take where I just fully lost it, and I had to yell. I yelled cut with like a warbly voice, and Lily Gladstone, I could just hear her from the garden say, "Are you crying again?" And I was like, "Yes, sorry." But later we talked about it, and she was like, "It was incredibly motivating because it means that like it's really working." And I was like, "Yes."
So that's a hot tip. If you cry, it really helps the actors. They really really respond well to it.
I mean, it's a thing like I remember working with Bowen Yang on Fire Island, and this was his first kind of bigger film role, and he told me that because he's kind of grown up in Saturday Night Live, that it was weird for him to finish a scene and not have people laugh, and so I started laughing and kind of ruining takes, just to like show like this is funny, this is working, and and we would have to deal with it in sound later, but I think it helped the environment on set and helped the performances. You give your actors what they're asking for, so yeah.
I mean, the parent analogy is spot on. Every kid has a different need, and they have very different communication styles. Speaking of Bowen, he's a repeat customer, which I always feel like is a good sign, not only that the final product worked, but also the process. What is it about Bowen that you're excited to be working with him 2 movies in a row, possibly more in the future? I think he's like so talented, and it's so fun to see him kind of come down from the SNL space into a more grounded real world, and giving someone like that the opportunity to portray a real version, or like a realer version of himself, is like a great gift to people like me who are big fans. Like, what is that relationship like?
Yeah, I think with Bowen, that character of Chris is so much my boyfriend. It's so much my friends, and so it just made sense to cast a friend who could really capture a specific generational identity that I was really interested in. I wanted this character to feel the burden of choice, and that's something that I've talked to Bowen about, and I saw how much he understands that dilemma, and I think there's also just something so beautiful about Bowen that there's an immense vulnerability that you just connect with him. You really understand him, and this was a character that's a little bit hard to understand, and so I wanted that quality that he so naturally brings. I think I mentioned before too that as much as I was interested in these actors really embodying their characters, I was also interested in process, and he's just such a sweet, like, generous collaborator, and really understands the kind of how the vibe on set really reflects in the movie, and there's a sweetness that I think is like super necessary for this film to work. And he's such a big part of that. He's definitely kind of, what is it, like, cruise social director, like he really loves being able to gather people together. And, it was just, a real joy to have him be a part of this family. While we were filming in Vancouver, like, we went to go see Lily's film Fancy Dance that was out theatrically, and we went to go see, there was a Korean choir in Vancouver that performed Mamma Mia, and we went to go see that as a cast. Like, it was just kind of like, it was a lot of fun, and I think there was just this a real sense of camaraderie that I was very happy could come together.
Yeah, you can definitely feel it in the movie. It feels like they've been friends forever. It's really sweet. you talk about how Bowen is sort of an embodiment of you and a lot of the friends that you have in your circle. You also talk about how you have your heart in your sleeve while you're filming this. I remember right after I saw this, I asked you like, how you feeling? How's it going? And you just said, oh, I'm so vulnerable because it's so personal and it's really whatever. And I was like, Andrew, all your movies are so personal. Like, how is this any different? And it made me start to wonder, like, does this movie feel different in how much you are putting yourself into it? Or is it just feel different because it's bigger or what? Because like, I feel like I watched Spa and I'm like, oh, that feels like so personal. I can't even imagine, going even deeper, but is it, what is your relationship between, making commercial art, but also very personal stuff at the same time? Because I see this and it feels like it has to be so personal because it's so specific and so nuanced, and you don't usually get to see people from the queer community having these kinds of really nuanced conversations.
Yeah. I wonder, it's such an interesting thing that I've actively been processing, since the release of the film. It is a weirdly personal movie for something that has an original, right? And I think it was that personal kind of the adaptation into having it be so personal was my way of having a creative North Star to make this version of the movie. I've mentioned this before in interviews, but there's a line in the film that Angela says where they're having this argument about kids, and Angela says, if it happens, it happens. And that's verbatim what my boyfriend told me in our first conversation about having kids. And I had to be like, no, it doesn't, not for queer people, and there's many little things about the film that are so much about my boyfriend. And I think, it is the fact that this is, a wide release film, like with Spa Night in many ways, it's such a kind of self-selecting group of people watching it. And in this one, because it's wider, I do feel more vulnerable, right? And especially kind of packaging so much personal inspiration into a rom-com, right? And so it's an odd feeling that I haven't quite figured out yet. I think it's also just at this level, when you have such a big cast too, our actress who plays Min's grandmother, Yoon Yo-jung, who's incredible Academy Award winner for the film Minari. I remember her telling me in our first conversation that she did not want to make this movie actually because she was like, I don't want to make indie films again. But she said that her elder son, he is a fan of mine, had watched Fire Island, and he's gay. And he felt that this would be a really cool project for her to take on. And she told me, that she would do this for him, and she told me more about their story. When gay marriage was legalized in New York, she threw their wedding.
Wow.
And so she said this was a family decision and she would do the movie. And as soon as she said that, I was thrilled, but I also was, I was like, oh, I have to really make this good. Like there are other people counting on me, and I think that's just what happens when your films scale, right? And so I put a lot of pressure on myself, and I worked really hard to try and make this the best that it could be, and really have its own spirit. Even though it's something that's supposed to be, kind of for the masses.
Yeah. I mean, I think it totally works. Like, and all of that pays off just because even I obviously I'm Asian American, but I am not queer. And yet there's so much about this movie that resonates deeply. Just even I think about Angela's fear of becoming her mother, which is, that's across the board. Every generation has that kind of goes through that. And there's so many stories that tell that. But seeing that through this very specific lens, like hit harder than usual, especially I'm a dad now. And I feel this like every day where I'm like, oh my God, am I becoming my parents? I'm going to ask one more question because I think we're running out of time. Watching this movie, I had this really interesting, because you always have the experience of watching the film, and then you have the experience of thinking about watching the film, and like the sort of the meta context of where you came from before you went into that theater. And the weird thing, sorry, that's a really heady, dumb way to start this question. Watching things like Fire Island and then this movie, you've managed to take so much depth and authenticity and bringing it to queer stories in a way that, like, I personally don't get to see that often. The Fire Island, it's Bowen is wondering if he wants to have the more heteronormative milestones of like romance and being swept off your feet or whatever. And then in this movie, it's evolved and matured into a question of, as a gay person, do I want to have marriage? Do I want to have kids? And it's so beautiful and it's so exciting to see that kind of world, because it feels, like I said, it feels like progress. When you compare it to the original movie, what those characters are dealing with feels, like a true Pokemon evolution. We're going to Charizard, right? But then, at the same time, we're in this really weird place where the pendulum is swinging. And it's not even swinging. It feels like the pendulum is broken in half, and now they're just kind of like smashing into each other. The DEI programs are getting cut. We have this very, it's a very bizarre place to be a filmmaker right now, not even thinking about what's happening in the federal government, just thinking about what's happening right now in our industry. Like, how do you navigate this? Where do you find hope in all of it? What is your role in this, I guess? Which, I mean, maybe you don't even have an answer for that, and that's totally fair. But like, I find I've been having a lot of these conversations with my fellow filmmakers. Like, what are we to do as these seismic shifts are happening around us?
Yeah. Some murmurs. They're very real, very complex.
Do you have answers to that question? Because I don't.
I mean, I'll say, like, I think, you could, maybe it's a little reductive, but you could boil down kind of every film into doing one of two things. It's either like a reflection of our society, or it's like a wish fulfillment. It's what you want society to be. And I think films can kind of balance those things in certain ways. The Wedding Banquet for me, it does feel a little bit like wish fulfillment. It's like trying to show a version of the future that can hopefully give people a sense of optimism, a sense of control over their lives, that if this is what they want, that they can have that. And so, that for me is it just feels kind of responsible. I do think that there's a balance even within my own career, like Spa Night, I think is definitely more maybe a reflection of a current state, and it's a a less joyful movie, but
you don't think your version of The Wedding Banquet is also a reflection?
I agree with you. I do think that it is, but I'll also say that actually both in The Wedding Banquet and in Fire Island, I've been very careful to kind of avoid to avoid homophobia in a way, like I kind of wanted to show that as queer people, we have our own problems and we're kind of a disaster on our own. It's like hard enough as it is. Yeah. And I think it's in an effort to define a queer community within itself, as opposed to in contrast to like heteronormative society. There's definitely, it's interesting just to kind of go back to, one of your earlier questions about collaborating with James Schamus. We talked about Min's grandfather a lot, and we were like, do we show him? Like, should we show him? And we knew that if we did, that it might add kind of clearer stakes, but we ultimately decided not to because we wanted the homophobia to be at the periphery and really to focus on the drama of these characters who care about each other so much. Even grandma, that like at first it may feel like homophobia, but actually it's just this intense kind of desire to protect her grandson. Joan Chen's character, and Joan is so incredible at this, just like finding that, I maybe I've been a bad ally, and how can I be better? But yeah, I think there was just something about, wanting to tell as human a story, as specific a story to a community, so that, when you watch the film, even if you aren't a part of that community, that you really understand the humanity of these characters, and that hopefully that is enough of a, an opening to, understanding kind of like how we can create a better world. So much of this film is about kind of stewardship, about kind of making room for this next generation, the characters' jobs, the plot, the drama of their lives. In many ways, I hope that this film is part of that it can kind of steward more films that show the diversity of, the queer and Asian American experience. But I will say, I wish we lived in better times, like there are people who have asked me like, oh, are you happy that this film is coming out at this time? And it's kind of like, I'm glad that this film can be there for folks, but I wish it didn't have to be there in that same way. But I think it's something that, if people can come out of this film and feel a certain sense of optimism that gives them a strength to go out and, like protest or vote or participate in mutual aid, like that for me is so special and hopefully, just part of the larger impact of, this film and in art in general.
That's a great answer. I think we can all hope that our movies can do something, some small part in that kind of conversation. Thank you so much, Andrew. This was great. Thank you all for sticking around.
Thank you.
You guys had a good time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. The Director's Cut is available wherever you listen to podcasts. And please share, subscribe, rate, and review. We'd love to hear your feedback, and you can help fellow film buffs find the show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America.